Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our third session of best practices in street outreach to homeless people. I see a few faces on camera. We're always happy to see you and welcome back. We know you're busy folks. Hi, yay, some cameras on. Hi. I know you sometimes people aren't camera ready for the whole session, but at key points, if you can show us your faces, that's great. I'm Suzanne Wagner. If you're just joining the series, and Andrea White, who will raise her hand and say hi, is my co-facilitator. Shannon Quinn is also from Housing Innovations here supporting us through this process. And Molly, you want to say hello and welcome to folks?
Hi, everybody. I'm Molly Machado. I am a program manager at the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, and most of what I do every day is work with the different homeless outreach teams around the state. Thank you all so much for joining this afternoon.
Thanks, Molly, and thanks, Molly and Demas, for this training because they're supporting the whole new outreach has gone through a lot of changes over the last few years, and we've gotten some new resources in Connecticut. I always say we. I'm from New York, but we've been working and supporting Connecticut for years, and some people tell me I'm an honorary nutmegger, but I should say Connecticut has gotten some new resources through the snowfall, which is HUD funding. And so it's really great to have this program of support. And that's what this training is. It's part of training, communities of practice, tools, monitoring support to help you guys do your very, very difficult work. So I introduced Andrea and I. We are both social workers. We've done a lot of work, direct services to people who are experiencing homelessness or housing crises, and have an enormous amount of respect for you and your time. And we know there's probably 900 things you needed to do before this training started. And by the time the training's over, there'll be 9,000 things for you to do. So our goals are to make this useful to you and a good use of your time and engage you in some conversations and thinking that helps you feel empowered to do the work that you're doing, the really hard work and really hard and really important work. So we've already established we love to see your faces. If you can turn your camera on and your camera ready. If you have a special way you want to be addressed, you can change your screen name. There's a little picture up here that shows if you go up to these dots at the top right, you can rename yourself in case you want to assume a new identity for the day. Sometimes we've had that, or you just have a preferred way to be addressed. Shannon just uploaded the slides. I saw the pop up. So you can download them. The recording will be up on the website as soon as we can process it, which is usually pretty quickly. It's for you new staff, or if you want to go back and see things. We do love interaction, and we have polls. We have a couple of breakouts. We have ways that we hope we can have really a conversation about this, work together, and create connections between you guys because the goal here is really to have kind of one model of outreach, although it's going to vary by can and there's going to be differences, but also to have people connected across the cans and within the cans so that I know it's different when you're in person, but we hope some of these things on Zoom of having little breakouts help you make connections to people and also feel like you have a chance to process the information that we're sharing. We already mentioned the recording, and just in case we don't get through all the slides, I think we might get through everything, but some slides may just be for reference, and we'll pick them up in our ongoing trainings with you if there's anything substantial that we need to revisit. Okay. Oh, we learned this a couple of sessions ago that some folks don't have a working microphone on their computer. I see some popping in the chat, and I'm thinking,
About
okay,
joining and rejoining.
Shannon, you'll let me know if there's anything I have to take care of. Okay, thank you. So if you don't have a microphone on your computer or your laptop, whatever you're connecting in from, you can join by phone, and there's the telephone number, the meeting ID, and the passcode. So I'm just going to pause on that slide in case anybody needs to take that information down or wants to. What I would do is take a picture
That
with my telephone?
Those are in the chat also, if that's helpful.
Oh, thank you. And it's in the chat. So now I can proceed through the slides. Thanks, Shannon. Okay. So just it's a big crowd. We are at 41 now. We can't really go around and say hi, all of us, although that'll be fun and we'll do that at some point. But put in the chat box your agency and your role or title there. What location generally and what city or town are you in? Remembering that this is a statewide training. And the best movie or show that you recently watched. One thing is we know you bring a lot to this work. By Tuesday afternoon, a lot's happened, right? And you're busy. And we want to level the deck a little bit, just kind of get everybody a chance to think about something else. So, what's the best movie or show you recently watched? And who you are, please, in the chat.
Am I student intern or am I JP Rossi?
No, student intern.
Substance.
Pretty funny. We both put it in there.
Yeah, well, feel free to be yourself.
Huh.
I'm putting mine in. It's the Forge. Great. See, we'll all get new ideas. Oh, Wicked's probably going to come up more than once. I'll just have a bet on that one. Oh, nice. A concert. Yeah, that's great. Media that makes you happy, as opposed to the Facebook sewer drain or Instagram sewer drain. I don't know if people know what I mean by that, but suits. Yep. Okay. The substance seems to be popular too. All right. We have people from all over. I see the state.
Barbie. Was that a good movie? I haven't seen it.
Oh my God, I thought it was outstanding. Can't recommend it enough. I laughed,
Really?
I cried. Oh yeah, it was great.
Okay.
Moana 2. Okay. All right. So we all had a thought about something other than what we do every day for our jobs, which is really what that's about. And maybe smiled and took a breath
Mhm.
thinking about that and thinking about the next time you can go back and if it was a binge, get back to binge watching. Okay. All right, that's enough of me being kind of silly. So what we do know a lot's happened since we last saw you. First of all, because your work is busy, but also it's been a few weeks since we were together, and this is the third in the best practices series. And just to recap, kind of what we've been talking about, and also I think some people may not have been here for every session. We'll know that in a minute because we have a poll about it. But this is really to provide information, resources, knowledge, and skills that will help you run your street outreach programs or do your street outreach practice in line with the standards that the state of Connecticut has adopted. And everyone should be familiar with them. They're linked in a later slide. It is kind of the outreach guidebook, if you will, for how to do the work. There's a lot of tools in there and there's a lot of the standards and the expectations, but there's also resources there to help you do that. So this training is directly related to really supporting you in implementing those standards. So we went over the value and the visions and the goals that Connecticut established. We've talked about there's a housing first approach that while we are certainly helping people stay alive in this freezing weather, which is so important, and helping them get their basic needs met, but that we're really looking at housing from every encounter with people and always looking for the next housing option that we can find. We also talked about trauma-informed and client-centered processes and practices, and that really is thread through everything. I mean, everything has to be trauma-informed, our assessments, the way we interact with people, how we approach them, and also being client-centered and really deferring to the people we're working with as experts on their own lives, creating goals together that we both can work on, as opposed to, directing the work, but really having a practice that gives people as much control as they can have, because obviously when you're unsheltered, your life is probably, you have as little control as you almost ever have. in many ways. So we want to give that back. And then we went over kind of housing focused case management, which many of you in Connecticut, because Connecticut's a leader and has been doing housing focused case management for decades. Many of you are familiar with, but we know some of you are new. Some of you may have come from other fields. And so key to that practice is assertive engagement, assessing housing needs and preferences. So we keep engaging, we keep talking about housing, we try to understand what's important to people about that housing, helping set goals around housing. And for some people, it may be shelter may be the where the next place they're planning to go. For some, it may be returning to friends and family. For others, it's getting on into rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing. There's a lot of different options. We use that term really broadly to getting from an unsheltered situation to a situation where you're inside and have utilities, as Steve DeLella would always say. Very important. So an abandoned house that doesn't have utilities is not a good outcome. Then we also talked about housing planning, having a goal, working with people towards their goals, and then the process of access. So those are the things we covered. I love seeing that there's a lot more happened in the chat. Great. More good things. But we're going to launch a couple of polls just to get a sense of who's here today. How did they work? Okay. So, the first poll is, did you attend any of the two previous best practices in street outreach training sessions? And those were held December 2nd and December 9th, so a full month ago. Okay, I forgot to read the responses, but I'm guessing you can see them. Yes, session one, yes, session two, both sessions, neither session, not sure, or you watch the recordings because the recordings have been posted. Okay. Give it another few seconds. Okay, we have a good response rate. So I'm going to end the poll. Oh, and the second one, I'm sorry. People didn't get to, I don't think I can undo that. I didn't realize they both relaunched the poll. I don't know. Oh, no, it will clear the results. All right, I'm going to share the results and we can always relaunch it afterwards, but um, sorry about that. I didn't realize it launched both at the same time. Okay, so we have a lot of people, about 60% of the people who came to both sessions, which is great. We have, and so 76%, okay, have at least attended one. Okay, and a couple of you attended the recordings. Okay, and then well, 27 people got to answer the second question. Have you used or reviewed the statewide street outreach standards since the training began? Yes, great, 81%. No, 10%, only 3 people, 11%, not sure, 2. Okay, great. So that's really good. It should hopefully be something that is a useful resource to you. And as we continue in our support in the program, we'll create new tools and resources that will be released outside of the standards, like kind of document, but to help you do your work. Okay. So what are we going to talk about today? We're just going to pick up. We did not get through all the slides last time, but the slides we didn't cover were really important about helping people once they've moved into housing. What does that support around that transition look like? And then we're going to get into some practices that really support you in your work and having good, safe practice for you, for your colleagues, for the people you're working with, for the homeless people, talking about maximizing safety on outreach, reducing harm, and de-escalation strategies. So really keeping it calm. We'll also talk about everybody's, I know number 3 bullet is everybody's favorite, documentation and data. Hopefully, that will be easier and easier as you have an app for outreach and resources so that you don't have to, that you can record in the field. We talk a little bit about client rights, and then we'll wrap it up. So that's today's session. So just to pick up on kind of the content area where we were last time, we talked about helping people get into housing, and that's kind of the main goal, but obviously we want them to stay there. And so it's very different when people move into housing. But we want to help support them through the process, right? So if there's a CAN process, we want to make sure we're participating in the CAN process if they're engaged in that, if they're not going back to family and friends or maybe going to their own place. We also want to prepare people for being tenants, right? Teaching them their rights and responsibilities. You may revisit this after they move in because people will need reinforcement of these principles. I'm going to say, even though many of you are serving people who may be a little older, who may have been around for a while, they haven't necessarily had a lease in their own name for a while or maybe ever. So we want to make sure people know what is their lease, their rights and responsibility. We want to anticipate risks. We know because we have a good housing history what might have come up for a person before in terms of how they lost their housing. If it was conflict, for example, and they're going to be living with other people, well, we want to anticipate that there may be some conflict again, right? And how can we help prepare for that? What tools and resources? If it's a money issue, maybe it's guilt about the kids. So the kids come, they give the kids money, and then they don't pay their rent. Well, how can we plan for that? Because they're going to feel guilty about the kids and want to give them things. That's going to happen again. But we don't want that to create housing risk, right? We certainly also want to help people feel like they're at home, getting comfortable with furniture and, houseware items that they need. This is something that sometimes communities don't have resources for, and it really leads to bad outcomes. I don't think we've really ever heard that coming up too much in Connecticut, but people not having just the basics, bed, dresser, table, and, enough to cook something through the microwave and a few dishes, but also helping people find some comfort there, make it feel like home for them. Also thinking about how do you structure your time when you move from the streets into housing. Things are different. When you're on the street, you may have to go over here for lunch for the soup kitchen or over here to get a shower, or, you can use the cold weather shelter overnight, but you have to leave in the morning, right? So your day is structured around the use of services and things you do. So now when you're in housing, people are going to have a different structure and some support around putting that in place. Um, will be really is helpful to folks as they figure out a new way of living. I mean, we all have stories. I'm already going on too long, so I can't tell too many stories. Um, but of people, this is the most extreme of a man who lived in a tree for 10 years. Well, when he moved into housing, lived in the balcony for a couple of years till he could move inside, right? That transition can be really difficult. So helping people structure their days and structure their lives. And then per the standards, the contracts allow for support to be provided in aftercare by outreach staff and teams for 90 days post move-in, and you can keep enrollments open and check in with people via phone, via Zoom, via visit. And I'll just say from the evidence, there hasn't been as much research on aftercare as there should be, but CTI is a form of aftercare and it's evidence-based. But any programs that do have aftercare show better results. And it's really, your relationship is so critical, and it's going to be a loss for people to lose you. The person who housed someone is a very key person in their lives. And it gives time for like a little bit of a termination process and support as they connect to the new worker or their new supports. So that's a gift. And I think one thing we have seen, I think many of you know, we work nationally with lots of other communities, is that they cannot be there for that aftercare. And so if I move in housing and I'm kind of panicking and I want to call Shannon, who was my worker, they can, which is great, right? To be able to give people that level of reassurance. As they move in. We also want to leverage those relationships by doing the warm handoff, right? So you are a trusted person. You've been working with this person for a long time, help them through some of their roughest days, help them find a place, and have a great relationship. So helping that connect and transfer that engagement to the next worker, another evidence-based practice. So if possible, if they're going to move into supportive housing, having meetings that are really a little more substantive than just a quick hi, goodbye with the worker to help share what you know, get acquainted, transfer that engagement. And I know it's a best practice, and I know many of you already do it, but just want to reinforce how important that practice is. And then, providing the follow-up support. The standard here that's in the standards is monthly attempts to visit or contact clients after move-in to check in whether they need things for at least 3 months. So can be a very light touch if people don't need you, but you're just checking in to make sure everything's okay. We know, from some data that those first 3 to 6 months are really critical for making it stick. And so it's really great that you could continue to be involved. Okay, now I think I'm going to pass it over to Andrea, who's going to pick up on kind of making sure we're safe doing this street outreach work.
Yeah. Thanks, Suzanne. So it's hard. I mean, if the worker doesn't feel safe, right, it's really hard to concentrate on the person in front of you. So we're going to talk about that as much as we can. All we talked about, engagement, assessment, all requires an intense concentration and really listening to that person. And we want to put structures and strategies in place so that you do feel safe, so the people that we serve feel safe, and so that we can have these kind of really deep conversations. So the first one is pretty simple. You want to make sure people know where you are. You want to have somebody you can contact, tell them where you're going to be, tell them when you expect to leave, call them when you leave. I'm worried about everything in terms of safety. I'm worried about you traveling there. The weather has been lovely in Connecticut. So, if your car breaks down, is somebody going to come looking for you? You want to know all of those things. And you want to check in with people to let them know that you're done with an appointment or that you're done with the visit and that you're coming back or you're going to the next one. The other thing is to really take a look at your safety protocols in your agency, and they're probably going to give you some real guidance. Most importantly, we're in that person's space, right? This is not our office. We don't have control of this space. We don't have a lot of people behind us ready to help us if something goes wrong. So we're in their space, so we want to really respect that space. And we want to think about the conversations we're having, right? About what is best done in their space. If you could do things in pairs, that's great. If you can't, I know a lot of you all are on very small outreach teams. Ask somebody to go with you. If you need somebody to go with you, you should have somebody to go with you. And you know what? You can use somebody else in your agency, right? It doesn't have to be another person in outreach, but you want to do that as much as possible when you need that kind of help. Also, knowing when to walk away. I don't mean walk away forever. Somebody might be refusing services or somebody might be increasingly agitated when you're talking to them. Back off, right? We don't have to accomplish everything at once. Back off and offer to come back, right? My big line is usually, okay, you know, this seems like not a great time. How about I come back tomorrow? How do you want your coffee? Right? I mean, offer people options. People don't always have to. I don't know about you all, but I wouldn't want to talk about everything every day. So, let's think about that. Also think about what's going on. If there's sex, if there's drugs, if if there are people around that you're not comfortable with, back off. It's okay. Come back or make an appointment with the person to meet them in soup kitchen, a little more in controlled environment, right? We don't have to accomplish everything at once. The other thing I want to say about this is that you want to make sure that your team and other people on your team and other people who might go with you agree about that, right? So that if somebody's using a lot of drugs, if one person on the team wants to leave and the other person says, it doesn't bother me, I'm going to stay, that creates a dynamic where the person thinks that one person is more open to them or one person is more accepting of it. So you want to get some consistency and you want to talk about it. You want to do it in the nicest way possible. But if you do have those kind of structures, you want to make sure it's consistent. The other thing is, don't go with a lot of bling on, right? We want to make it as simple as possible, right? Also, high heels, they're out, right? You want to have something you can move in. Every once in a while, I see people on TV with got these 4-inch heels, not for outers, you darling, right? So that we want to make sure they look fabulous, but save them for the club. Okay. Um, and that the other thing is know how to get help and know how long it's going to take. That's really important. If you run into a problem, you're going to back off, right? You're going to call for help, right? But know how long that help is going to take to get there. And that's going to make the decision about, maybe driving away and waiting for somebody at a place and making arrangements for somebody else to try the person, or maybe it's even the police, or maybe it's the mobile crisis team. But you want to know how long it's going to take. You want to sit there in an ongoing crisis where you're really not feeling safe. You want to back off until you can get that help. So, and it depends. I mean, I've heard people say that, okay, if you call the police because you need the police, it's going to take about 2 hours. 2 hours is a long time, right? So you're going to make a plan for that time. If it's going to take, a couple hours for mobile crisis to get there, make a plan for that, right? You maybe want to make a safety plan with the person, but you don't want to put yourself in the middle of it. Okay, let's go to the next one. So the other thing is just basic logistics. Always have your phone charged, right? So that you can get help. Know also where there are sort of blackout areas. I know in Connecticut, sometimes there are places where phones don't work. Know about that and be prepared for that. Um, the other thing is, be able to get out, right? Don't get yourself in a situation where the person is between you and the exit, and that you're between the person and the exit. You want both people to be easily, and even if that means if they're, like say in an abandoned building, even if that means you got to talk to people outside or in a more open space, suggest that, right? The other thing is no surprises. People don't like people showing up in what they consider their house. It's not a house. They're homeless, but you know what? It's the only house they got. So that we want to make sure that we let people know. I know when people don't show up for a while, we try to look for people, but popping up can create all sorts of problems, and you want to think about and plan for how you do that. You also want to let people know the simplest thing to do is if people disappear is let them know what your schedule is. I'm at this soup kitchen every Tuesday, and if you want to see me, I'm there. You can come and see me. So it gives them another option. Is there a place or some place I can call when I can't find you? Right? You want to do some planning for that, but the pop-up visits it can be difficult for people. Um, the other thing is being clear about what's in existence, right? I need you to, let's say somebody's living in a tent. I need you to come out of this tent because you see all the knives in there. Can we talk someplace that is not, the knives aren't, right? Or I can't come in there. I often use something like, I'm not allowed to, right? I'm not allowed to be around firearms. Let's figure out a way that we can deal with this. Or that aggressive pets, right? And some people, they may have an aggressive pet, but they may be willing, it's very hard to get rid of the pet. I mean, that's not what you're asking, but sometimes person can put them on a leash or show you that they're under control, right? You might bring something for the pet, right? So that they know that you're accepting of the pet, but that you want to be safe. So
Our
those
next
sorts of
session
things.
at the end of the month is going to be on addressing pets,
Yeah.
not only from this perspective, but just in general when people have pets when we're doing street outreach.
I usually keep some dog biscuits or some stuff for dogs in my pocket. And I know that one time I went over to a friend's house afterwards and their dog practically crawled into my pocket. So evidently they're very successful. You also want to know what their history is. Do they have a history of dangerous behavior? Do you know what sets it off? What's the history? Do they have a history of suicidal behavior? We want to be really aware of those things and prepared for a plan in case this becomes a crisis. The other thing is, a person has a history of drugs and alcohol. When's the best time? When they're the most sober. I know a lot of people say, only go when they're sober. And I hear people say all the time, and I know this, that would be never. Okay, we're not saying never, but is the morning good? One of the things that an outreach worker taught me is they used to bring, this is New York, so this is the New York sandwich, a bacon, egg, and cheese whenever they went to visit people. Because, in the morning, oftentimes hunger will stave off some of those feeding somebody will stave off some of those cravings. It'll at least absorb some of the stuff from the night before. So think about it. If you can bring a granola bar, whatever you have, right? Gives people something to eat, come really early in the morning. The other thing is, know the local police and know the people. I know you have CIT, which is crisis intervention trained officers in Connecticut, and you want to really think about how you have a relationship with them, know how to get in touch with them. It's usually outside of the 911 system, how long it will take when they're on. There's not a lot of them. So those are things you want to know. And the other thing is police know a lot of stuff. People tell them where people are, people describe behavior. So you want to have those kinds of conversations and make a relationship with them. And I know it's not supposed to happen this way, but if you have a relationship with the local police, they come faster because they know you, right? So that's always an important thing.
Well, and they may see a person who you're looking for and could be
Yep.
a resource to find someone. There are police who want to help on this, right? And I know that's a very hot topic. But
Yes.
you do have CIT teams and they are there and they do have a lot more surveillance and access to information and connections to resources. So trying to make something workable. And I know also police departments are local, so they're not all the
Yep.
same, right? So it really is it's a very relationship based approach and trying to create humanity there if it's not, or support it if it is there. I do know a few policemen who really do care quite a bit and have met
Yep.
some amazing folks. So
The other thing I would suggest, and this we learned in supportive housing, that if the police are particularly helpful to you, write them a letter. CC it to that commander or who's ever in charge of that precinct or that, and write them a letter when they do a really good job. And it actually interests other officers in sort of what they're doing, which is helpful. The other thing is they deserve the credit, right? And that in a lot of places, promotions, stuff like that are based on those. And the other thing is, particularly with people's relationship with the police now, they never get those letters. So it's particularly appreciated. I'm not saying if they don't do a good job or if they just do a regular job, write a letter, but if they do a really good job, write a letter. I'll give you an example. We had a guy who had been homeless for like 12 years and ended up in supported housing in New Orleans and took off. And they kept trying to trace him and kept trying to trace him. And they found that he used his ATM card in Houston. So we called the CIT officers in Houston, gave him his description. 3 hours later, they called us back. They talked to the guy. They said, "Hey, Judy, your case manager is looking for you." Oh, he said, "I like Judy." They said, "Great. You want to go back and see her?" Yeah. They got him a bus ticket and they took him out to lunch before he got on the bus. And he considered that whole experience lovely. And we were really relieved because this guy was really great with him, right? And it did something. And he had some cognitive stuff going on and he could have been gone forever. So, there are some really fabulous police officers out there. The other thing is, if there is an incident, write it down, right? Fill out an incident report and look at your agency's incident reports and talk about it. Incident reports are not about pointing fingers, about who did what wrong, but they're also about looking at policy and they're about looking at strategies and figuring out ways that you can provide people more support in the future. That's what they're supposed to be about. So using that incident reporting policies and procedures as an opportunity to learn something. And I used to do incident review for our agency, and I learned something every time people described it. Sometimes they tried things that I thought, wow, that's a great thing. So let's take a look at the next one. So
Sorry,
Suzanne,
just moving us along.
good, okay. Suzanne mentioned the policies and the standards. So here we go. There's checklists in the standards, which I have seen to be really helpful. I'd be interested to hear what you think. And so this is a checklist about maintaining safety for both clients and staff. And you see it. I'm not going to read it to you. You can read it, right? On the screen. Yeah. Um, but it's things you do, things we've been talking about, like listening, coming back when you say you're going to come back, being reliable, explaining to people what you can do. There's a link to the standards in the chat, right? Suzanne talked about providing some comfort. Those are all things that are really important. Oh, I said I wasn't going to read it to you, but I just did.
Well,
Um,
and I think that this is just an example, like a teaser,
yeah.
to get you into the standards. There are lots of great little checklists and tip sheets and things like that, and this is one of them. And especially when people are new, and I always think about my early days as a worker as some of the most challenging days I've ever had in my career because they didn't really know what I was doing. And outreach work is really complicated. So hopefully the checklist and we'll of course keep updating things, but can be tools that you can use, your team can use, your new staff can use, so that they feel a little less intimidated in the field.
And when people feel prepared, it feels completely different. So that the checklists are really important for that. The other thing is a way to talk to people about what their options are in a non-confrontational manner. And we use a harm reduction plan that, and I'm going to give you an example, but it really asks for what the client's priorities are and what they see as the choices and what they see as the positives and negatives of the choices. So it helps them in the goal setting. It helps them talk about what's negotiable and what's not negotiable for them. And it raises their awareness that there's more than one option to every problem. When you're homeless, everything feels like it has to be done right away. And getting people to consider a couple of different options is really important. So you're going to consider the options, list some strategies. Shannon just put a blank harm reduction plan in. So let's look at the harm reduction plan. So there's a risk, and it's sleeping in the park, and they got beat up. Okay, that makes my heart clutch, right? They got beat up in the park. Okay. So first of all, I need to take a deep breath because this is not me, this is them, and we have to listen to what they're thinking about. So what's one option? Go to the shelter. Okay. So get them to talk about the benefits of the shelter, right? It's warm, it's safer, maybe it's their showers, their food. But what bothers me about the shelter? I can't drink. Okay. There are too many rules. It's far away. I can't collect cans, so I'll have no money. Okay. So what's non-negotiable for you? I'm not going to give up the booth. Okay. So let's talk about what else you can do to keep yourself safe. Sleep near a buddy. You can drink. No one tells me what to do. Well, that's debatable, but okay. It's convenient. And my buddy shares his booze. Boy, that's a positive. Okay. But the negatives are, and it's very important for people to start thinking about these negatives. The police wake me up. It's hard to stay warm and dry. More work to take care of myself. Okay, so people are beginning to consider their options. You're really supporting this kind of critical thinking. Doesn't have to solve the problem right away, but expanding people's options. And you know what? They may think about the benefits of the shelter one night when they're really cold and think, I could do this, right? So that you were planting seeds in the harm reduction plan, you're also giving people options and helping them figure out strategies. Okay, let's go to the next one. Unless people have questions. Does this make sense to people? Nod your head. Yeah. Does this reflect some of the conversations you're having with people? Yeah, okay. So let's go to the small group and talk about it, right? What do you do to stay safe during outreach? What are the strategies that you use? What are the strategies you're interested in? And how are you helping clients reduce risk? Kind of conversations are
And
you
I think
having with
some of the
people?
safety thing is that clients are unsafe, right? And
Yes. Yeah.
so things that they're doing are unsafe for them, and harm reduction is really helping them think about how they may keep themselves safer. So
Yep.
safety could be about us, for us as staff, safety could be for the clients themselves who,
Yep.
by just being virtue of living outside, it is high risk. I mean, especially with the weather we're having now, you can freeze to death, and it's not that hard. So that's the connections with them. But when you get into the groups, I think it's really about, introducing yourselves to each other. You're making new friends,
Ah,
hopefully, or new connections, and then really talking about safety both for staff, for clients, in their interactions with other people. So we're going to the Zoom automatically assign you to a room. So just click the button to join the room and come back to the main session here. If you're having any trouble, then we'll address that. And we'll give you like 10 minutes or so to talk about this.
yep.
Shannon will pause recording
Yep.
conversation.
Yeah.
Sorry. Is that all right?
All right. No, yeah, it's fine. So welcome back. Did you hear anything? Did you talk about anything that was particularly helpful in terms of safety for yourselves, safety for the people you serve, how to help people reduce risks? I know boundaries were a thing that was discussed in some of the things, how you can sort of structure that. Anything you want to talk about?
Somebody in my group had mentioned they set an alarm on their phone for
Yeah.
just a certain amount of time so that there's always an out.
Ah, that's
You
an
know,
interesting thing.
if there's some discomfort, it's, oh well, sorry, I've really got to go. I've got this, whatever it is, this other thing I have to go and do, or other person I have to go and meet.
Uh-huh.
So you're not necessarily expressing your discomfort. It's just a oops, gotta go.
Okay.
I liked that idea.
Yeah, and telling people that how much time you've got can be helpful too in the beginning. And then you say, okay, remember we talked about, right? That's a good thing. Anybody else?
Um, I suppose so. Our conversation about what we do to stay safe, like there were working in teams, communicating your location, all of that. You encounter unsafe situations sometimes, but we were talking about how just simply, the treating the folks that we're working with like people can go so
Yep.
far in terms of like preventing it, in terms of de-escalating, in terms of like building relationships
Yep.
where people are really clear about the fact that you're here to help. But our conversation kind of morphed into a discussion about sort of shelter
Mm-hmm.
and the challenges that shelter faces for so many, that presents for so many people, whether it's like,
Yeah.
I just got out of incarceration and I find that environment intensely triggering. Whether it's like, the staff are really unprofessional and they make arbitrary decisions that I feel dehumanized by. Whether it's like my stuff keeps getting stolen, how like
Yep.
this sort of this thing that ostensibly ought to be eliminating some element of risk ends up being like kind of a distraction sometimes from, or something you're almost working against in order to accomplish your goals at times.
No, I think that's very true. And that shelter can be extremely triggering for people and can be a very difficult thing to manage for some people. I also think that even having a conversation of what are some of the benefits helps people, like they may use the shelter for one night when it's really cold
Mhm.
and helps them negotiate that resource. I think that can make people feel more powerful, which is always helpful when you're in a situation that is a little bit uncomfortable, or a lot uncomfortable. But I think your relationship with them and that you're not going to force them to go and do something is a huge thing. I mean, when people feel like they're backed in a corner and you're going to force them to do something, that's when, the ball goes up. And that relationship about really hearing what their issues are can be really helpful. And they may never use shelter. Most people who have been on the streets have used shelter, but they may never get there. But there are other options, right? Are the cold weather shelters equally difficult for people, or is there a difference? That might be something to look at.
Yeah, I think they're, I mean, the fun, it's like shelters here, and I'm assuming everywhere in the state, folks are waiting for 2 months to get in, and it's like,
Uh,
by the
yeah.
time you get in, it's sort of like, well, here I
Yeah.
am. Whereas the cold weather, certainly, like we've seen, like, upwards of 60 people have used it so far this winter in Danbury, but like often for like 2 nights at a stretch, and then they're gone for 5 days, and then they come back for 2 nights, and then, it's sort of like as needed because they can just show up. It's first come, first serve.
Yeah.
That sounds like it works for some people.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a positive thing.
And there's a subset of the population here who their only engagement with any kind of service has been cold weather shelter.
Mm,
We engage, we do can appointments, we do all of it. But once the weather warms up, they're gone. We don't see them again until the next winter.
yeah, that's a hard thing. Maybe it's some of the stuff can happen in the cold weather shelter, but it's a hard, right. It's they're really taking that emergency shelter to an extreme. And it's hard because it's hard to do the tasks when people are, moving around so much. We discussed how to safely engage with an encampment that's inside of an abandoned building. Ooh, that's a tough one. So what did you talk about, BB?
So we kind of talked about how to like safely engage. So
Yep,
in my team, so I manage an outreach program. So I'm trying to get feedback from case managers, like what do they look for in their supervisor to provide
a good
safety.
question.
Yeah. So I brought up the scenario that I'm actually facing that we have an abandoned building and there's an encampment inside, but I don't feel safe sending my staff in there.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I don't want to get the police involved either because if it's not necessary, I don't want to because it's going to affect engagement. Um,
Yeah,
so some of the feedback I got was maybe doing like frequent drive-bys and see if you see anyone outside that you can engage with, or
that's a good
leaving,
idea.
yeah, or leaving a letter outside with contact information and letting them know like what we do and if they need any help.
Yep.
Show up with one of those big boxes of Dunkin' Donuts coffee
Yes,
on
I
a
was just
cold
thinking that.
morning
Yeah,
That's a good one.
and
Yeah.
some donuts outside. And,
yeah,
I think maybe a person might come out, at least one, just to procure for everyone else, right?
Yeah.
At a minimum, there's probably somebody who's got that role of the procurer if they're living inside a place of getting
Mm-hmm.
things for the group. So then you'll meet the leader or the leader on the food side.
mhm.
Yeah. Getting those.
Nutmeggers love their Dunkin' Donuts.
Thank you.
Sometimes, yeah, it's a really great idea. The coffee is huge and it brings a large piece of comfort. Sometimes asking the leader, the person who comes out, is there anybody in there who could use our help, and explain what you do? And sometimes it's a lot less threatening if people are talking about somebody else's needs than their own. So that will sometimes really start a conversation.
I know that we haven't talked about firemen, but
Yeah,
abandoned buildings are the business of firemen, actually, and that could be a safe, really unsafe place. So I get it about the cops. if you could get someone to talk to you and talk about just some concerns about making sure that the building is a safe place to be. And that's where maybe creative engagement, although the
Yeah.
firemen, you don't want a fireman to come and board the building up so they can't
Yeah.
get back in either. But I guess there's that concern if people are in abandoned buildings, sometimes they are really, that's maybe as risky depending on what the quality of the place is as being outside, right? So that's also just something to keep in mind, maybe if you are able to engage them of like, oh, how is it inside? What is that place like? Kind of thing to try and get a sense if you don't want to walk in and I definitely think no one would ever walk in alone, right? Like
Right.
that's
Yes.
not even a thought. Although there may be some supermans or superwomen out there, but that's really risky to do that. But
Yeah, and you want to understand the structure of the encampment. And Suzanne said, the person coming out, maybe the leader of the encampment, you want to engage those people. So it's a different thing when you engage encampments. It's less one-on-one and more sort of being able to engage the group through the people that have the most control. And that's a tough thing to do, but that's a great thing to do.
really good example, BB. Thanks for sharing that. And thanks,
Yep.
Paul. Really good. All
Yep.
right, I think we need to move on,
Yep.
Andrea,
We
just time
do.
wise.
Okay. So this is a link to promoting safety and outreach. It's done by Healthcare for the Homeless. And it was a really interesting webinar. By the way, don't click on the arrow, click on the thing that's underlined at the top. I probably don't have to tell you guys that, but it took me a while to figure it out. So I figured I'd give you the benefit of my bumbling around. Okay.
And anything that's green and underlined in the PowerPoint is a live link. So
Yeah.
that's consistent. Oops. Okay. De-escalation.
Yep. So one of the things in de-escalation is you want to figure out how you're feeling, right? So I know what triggers me. When people are afraid, that really triggers me. That makes me want to fix things too fast. So I know that about myself. So I tend to back off. I tend to take some time. I tend to take a breath. I tend to remind myself that this is about them, not about me, right? And that those are things that you want to think about. You also want to think about if you're having a really hard time, if you can hand off to a partner or tap out, that's what you need to do, right? So having somebody there to rely on if it's a risky situation or if there's a situation that, is worrying you, having somebody else there who can take over is a really important thing. But that you want to remain as calm as possible and you want to be able to focus on the person. You also want to, not crowd the person, respect their personal space. If they're escalating, one of my big techniques is I usually sit down and lower my voice, right? So that people have to listen, right? And I try to get them to calm down that way. Whatever you're comfortable with, think about how you calm situations down in your regular life and think about how to do that. You want to stand a ways away from people. You don't want people to feel trapped because that escalates everything. And it also can decrease the person's anxiety. Use non-threatenal personal nonverbal cues. The more the person loses control, the less they hear you. So you want to react to their nonverbal communication and you want to react yourself. That's why I sit down if I can, right? Or back off or try to relax myself. Sometimes even the breathing technique works. If you start breathing, the person will start breathing, right? So you want to mentor people in using those calming down techniques, which could be verbal and nonverbal. You also want to be mindful of your facial expressions, something that's hard for me, but you want to really be sure that you are listening to the person, you're attentive to what the person says, that mind how your hands are, that sort of thing. So that you want to look at and not making sudden movements. You don't want to threaten the person because that'll escalate things. You want to be reassuring and calming as possible. Okay.
And I just want to say that all sounds so easy, right?
Oh
But
God.
in
Oh
in the heat of
man.
the moment, right, or when someone is escalating or getting aggravated or annoyed, maybe their housing isn't coming through, the benefits didn't come through, somebody didn't show up for them, something didn't happen, whatever it is that they're annoyed about, you don't have any bus passes left. Um, but that we're really mindful throughout that whole process of how we're coming off and not telling them to calm down, right?
Oh,
But we're also mindful of what that is making us feel, right? So
yeah,
it's not always so easy to do all these things. So practicing is important, right?
yeah,
And knowing your style. Like I tend to get a little excited about the stuff. So I need to know that about myself, right? And
yeah.
think about and practice how am I going to not overreact or in a way that's triggering to someone? Because I might want to reach out and hug them, right? Because they're upset about something. Well, for some people, that can be really, 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 really not a good thing, right? Especially with all the trauma that people have been through. So we want to think about the way we use our bodies and really connect into what does it mean for me to do these things, to back off, to talk softly. Talking softly is like something it's a goal for me, and I'm a few decades old and I'm still can't get it right. So just a joke. Moving on.
You want to ask questions, right? You're interested in what the person is saying. Can you help me understand, right? You want to ask questions to gain an understanding about what they're so upset about. Seems like you're really upset. Did I get that right? Is there something, how can we help you? Be careful also moving to a solution right away, right? Because you want to listen really to what their concerns are and what they suggest and what's worked for them, right? And then you can negotiate towards that point, but solving problems right away. And most case managers want to help, right? And sometimes it's okay for them, right? So we need to really listen and think about what they're doing. The other thing is we can take responsibility for some of this. I'm sorry that this is happening. I'm sorry that this is so upsetting. Together, together, let's try to figure this out. The other thing is people will challenge you. You don't have all the answers. Can you get me housing right away? No, right? I can't. But I can help you put on the path. I know it's frustrating and that you need something so desperately right now, but that it's frustrating that it can't. And you know what? I wish more than anything we could do this. This is what I can help you with. Can we grab a cup of coffee? Can we talk about it? Um, and it's hard for people to understand that, right? But that you want to not respond to that kind of challenge, which is hard. Okay, let's go to the next one.
Is there a yellow line in everyone's screen, or is that just
No.
yes? I don't know what that is in the slides. It's kind of
Huh.
weird.
Oh yeah, there is. Okay. Um, saying what you can do right now. We just talked about that, right? This is what I can provide right now. How about if I try to get somebody, nobody's calling you back? Oh, that would be hard for me too. So let's figure this out, right? How about we try right now? Sometimes it works when I call them, sometimes it's going to work better when you call them. But you know what? Together we can get through this. So let's try. Can we try it right now? Um, also provide clear and enforceable limits. Your point about backing off. Here's an example. I'm sorry, if somebody is in your office or in your van or in your car and they're really escalating, we can't do this here. You can't stay here. We can walk out together, or I can ask security to walk you out, right? What are the options here? Walking out or leaving, that's not an option. That's not negotiable, right? People have to leave or have to not have that behavior, but these are the options, right? The other thing is leaving time for people to process, meaning leaving a little bit of, space for people and not being afraid of minutes where people aren't talking. You want people, our goal here is for people to help them get their thoughts together. And sometimes that takes time, and we've got to really honor that. Give them a couple of moments, right? And then the other thing is, people don't want to be rushed. And if you can give them time, that's going to help. And it may also help them consider what you've been talking about. Otherwise, they're going to be reacting to the next thing you say. Okay. So we're going to do a breakout.
This line.
So here's the example. Peter, oh man, this really happened to me. Peter showed up at your office to get bus tickets and there were none available. He walked 2 miles. It's hot out. He's angry. And now he's accused you of selling the tickets instead of giving them to clients. He's cursing and he's yelling and he's going to call the cops because you're thieves, right? So how do you respond to Peter? What might help Peter regain calm? What are you going to do to ensure everyone's safety? And what steps are you going to take if he continues to escalate? So think about a situation. It could be this situation, it could be one of your own, where somebody escalates like that. And how do you handle that situation? This is actually a common one. Have people ever been in that experience? No? Okay. So let's take 5 minutes.
Are you gonna, do we have time for the
Okay. So let's
10 minutes, I think?
right. Okay. So let's take 10
10,
minutes.
12. Rooms are closed now.
Okay. Welcome back. Sorry about that, room one. It looked like you were having a great conversation. I'm sorry we interrupted you. But what did people talk about? Was it a similar, have you had a similar situation? How are you going to respond to Peter? How are you going to maintain calm in this situation?
In my group, I was in group 5. We
Yeah.
talked about validating. We have to
Yeah.
validate how he's feeling,
Yeah.
and try to come up with some other type of like resolution for him. Maybe tapping out if we're unable to like get him to calm down. We can tap out and have someone else come in, maybe a supervisor or another colleague could come in and have that conversation with him.
Yep. And sometimes pulling a supervisor into that situation gives people a real sense that they're being heard in that way. It's actually how I came into this situation. That's a good one. Anybody else?
I know that when speaking with my group, I kind of spoke about maybe asking follow-up questions because maybe the reason why he's getting upset has nothing to do with the 2 bus tickets or the bus tickets that he's, upset about. It may be because he has to be somewhere and that's his transportation,
Yep.
It may be some other things that's pressing that he's worried about or concerned. So just having that conversation with him to kind of see, because there may be another way to kind of help him out if his transportation is what the issue is, or something like that. So it might be something outside of what we think is the issue.
It's a really good point. It may not be the bus tickets, it may be getting there, right?
Right.
But unless you know that, how are you going
Right.
to help people problem solve? So that's a great
Absolutely.
one.
So you're gonna really listen to him, to
Yeah.
what's really upsetting him, right? And it may be too that he's hot and maybe he wants a glass of water. Maybe,
Right.
I don't know if anybody
Mhm.
talked about that. Like,
Yep.
just, he's hot, he's been walking, kind of inviting him to have a seat, maybe have a glass of water, take a breath, kind of thing. Anything else come up in the different groups? Bus
Hi.
tickets are, yeah, hi, BB. Go ahead. Bus
So,
tickets are a hot item. They always cause conflict. So I'm just gonna
Yeah.
say,
mhm. So ultimately, like the last thing that if he's still escalating and you can't resolve it on your own, you bring in your supervisor. And
Yeah.
I presented, what do you do if your supervisor is not there in the office? So at my office here, we have like a code word for you when you ask your coworker, hey, I need a red file. They automatically know, okay, I need to call the police right now. Something's happening. They need my help. instead of telling the client we need to call the police, which could escalate things even more.
I'll say, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but having that plan in place beforehand is very
Yeah.
smart. And also, you know what? In some places, like there's somebody in your office who's like the whisperer, right? Who, and maybe, having access to them. So there's all sorts of plans that could be in place, but that's a good thing. And then, yeah, tapping out. And the other thing, yeah,
Well, and making sure you have a plan, right? So there may
right.
be, maybe it's red, yellow, and green, right? Like I could
Yeah,
see expanding that color, that file system. So, yellow means keep an eye on this, baby, and red is send somebody in or call the cops. But that way of making sure the team can communicate
yeah,
and people know when they need help. Because also it could be, this is when I want somebody to walk in, because that might be what is really helpful in that moment is somebody else to come in, change the energy in the room, maybe somebody who Peter has a good relationship with, or somebody who has something that he's been waiting for, something else that he's been waiting for, that maybe can distract him, right? But I think the team is so important, and I'm really glad you guys brought that up and
yeah,
listening to what's really behind this, because maybe he wants the bus tickets, but you don't have the bus tickets, but he really needs a ride, but you can get him a ride. You can figure that out.
yeah,
You can't
yeah,
get him a bus ticket, but you could get the ride, right? And maybe
yeah.
that's the issue, that if he was able to get there, he would be fine, but it's not the bus ticket itself.
That
But
this wasn't in here too, but you want to watch other people who are sort of around, right? And try not to get them to escalate the situation. So you may want to get them a little bit more isolated. Sometimes other clients that you're serving will say, "Yeah, I can't get a bus ticket either." And so that's all you need, right? So that you want to make sure that that happens and the communication with your team. You guys have this under control. It's a difficult situation. And, the other thing that I would suggest is you want to debrief this situation, right? It may rise to the level of an incident, and that's one of the ways to do it, but you want to debrief it with your team. And as, as you said, you want to check out to see if your plan needs some revision, like how would this be? How could we be more helpful next time? How could we do this? And also to calm down, because when somebody's that upset, it's really hard, right? And that you want somebody to talk to about it. So you want to really spend some time debriefing it with your colleagues, with your supervisor, with whoever's around, but just talk about the incident. Other things people wanted to say? No? Okay. So here are some more resources on de-escalation. There's the Homeless Housing Resource Center, trauma-informed approach to events of escalation. This has been really helpful. And it has a lot of the things that we were talking about. And then CCH did one on crisis intervention and de-escalation training. That's a useful one. So these are all resources for you.
One thing that just makes me think about this slide makes me think about is that there is an online list of the trainings and that have been like kind of vetted already. Someone on the team, one of the teams has looked at them, seen that they're decent, and so and they're also organized in a way, hopefully that'll be easy when you bring on new staff to get them through different trainings that you want to have them attend, including, these recordings, but also all these other things. So anything that's already recorded and you can watch, staff can watch on on their own at a schedule that works for them, because that's also a challenge with getting people trained is, the training's at 10 and they work, at a different hour. So I think
People have
that's
also
great.
taken sections of these recorded trainings and shown them in a team meeting and then talked about them, and that's often helpful.
Good.
And Shannon just put the inventory of the trainings in the chat so that you have it.
There you go. Got to get the chat. It's loaded with goodies today. The chat loaded with goodies. All
That's
right, so
okay.
we're in our last half hour, and I know that means you're like, your work is gnawing at you, and you're thinking about what you have to do when you get back, and you're thinking also about what else we're going to talk about. So I know a couple of these topics. We're going to talk about client rights, which is really important, and then we're going to talk about documentation and data. And don't leave. I'm going to make it interesting. We're going to talk fast, okay? Don't leave the training. We have been talking about clients' rights throughout this training because really it is about respecting people as adults, as partners in the process, as people we are working with, not on, we're not working on them, we're not doing things to them, we're working with them, we're walking alongside them. So that whole process of everything we've been discussing is about respecting people's rights. But there also are some very specific rights that we want to make sure we kind of call out around confidentiality. And this can be tough in outreach, right? Because there's lots of different players. You may be dealing with a shopkeeper, right? Because that's the person who's got the relationship. They sweep up for the shopkeeper gives them lunch, right? So we can't say, well, they missed her mental health appointment at the hospital this morning, so I want to know where they are, right? Because you can't say that to the shopkeeper, even though the shopkeeper may be a person who's really important in their life, right? So we want to think about confidentiality and making sure we're careful about sharing only what people need to know. And especially, like I said, in outreach, when you're working with other people outside your agency a lot, to really think about that, making sure you get signed releases if you want to talk regularly with someone about a particular person. And everybody knows this, but this is just so everybody knows it, is that you can't enter data in HMIS unless the person signs a release. The HMIS is the Homeless Management Information System, and that is for everyone who is experiencing a housing crisis or homelessness in Connecticut. But people can refuse to have their information. Most people agree, but people do need to sign an authorization. And then also, of course, record storage. This is less of an issue in terms of a file cabinet. That's what we called them in the old days in the 20th century. You all heard of file cabinets because now everything's stored in the cloud. But if you do have paper records, you want to make sure that they're stored and secured. And some of you may have offices where clients are in and out, or different staff, different teams. So making sure anything on paper is in particular is kept safe. And then also making sure people know about the grievance process. And grievance process is a requirement for agencies to have a grievance process. So make sure you've checked out in your agency's policies and procedures. What is the agency confidentiality policy? What is the agency grievance policy and procedure, right? So those are specific to your shop. If you are So we're trying to, with these programs, not have different rules for different funding sources, but we got a couple of them. And this is one, but I think this is a practice. If I was running a program or if I was doing an outreach, I would seek to apply this to everyone. But under the SNOFO, which was the SNAP Special Notice of Funding Opportunity, which was money from HUD, that comes through the continuum of care, and therefore it's subject to the continuum of care policies. And in the Connecticut Balance of State policies, people need to be provided with a statement of their rights and also their grievance rights. So you have linked again, these nice green links are English and Spanish versions of those notifications for people. And like I said, I would just recommend if you are partially SNOFO funded, you're gonna do it anyway. Why not just give it to everyone, and adjust it so that everyone knows their rights and their grievance process.
And
But if you are
Suzanne,
SNOFO, you must do it. Yeah, Molly.
if I can just jump in, if you're not
Sure.
SNOFO funded, that doesn't mean you can't also have these kinds of documents as part of your intake process. And we definitely encourage you to be having conversations about people's rights and about their right to grievances. And so if using these forms that already exist would make that easier for you, please feel free and reach out with questions.
Thanks, Molly. That's perfect because I do think it's just good practice and it really helps a lot if people know upfront these things and there's not confusion. It helps actually prevent some of those escalations that we talked about, where people feel like they're being treated arbitrary, or they didn't know the rules, or they didn't know their rights, or they didn't know how to grieve a decision that was made. So this helps in that it really does provide a structure for people in terms of their rights. So definitely encourage you. You do not have to receive snowfall funds to use these. Okay. Sorry, all of a sudden I've got like a little bit of a allergy attack here, but excuse me. So we're going to talk a little bit about documentation, and documentation is really um, about, writing down people's histories or documenting people's histories, documenting the service or housing plan and goals. And, I know that as a direct service worker, I was always quite adamant that really working with people was what I was there to do and not spending my time writing notes and doing documentation, right? And I think there's a lot of that's a real feeling that staff have. Um, but documentation is important. And I did learn that and I stopped fighting. I'll just say that. I, didn't keep that attitude up for decades. But the thing that really mattered to me was that documentation meant that if I could take a day off, one, that was important, right? Because we all need to take days off, and that people are not going to fall through the cracks, that somebody's going to know what's going on, that somebody can check in with them, that God forbid, say, not only did I just took a mental health day, but something else happened and I needed to take a week off, all of a sudden that someone could serve that person. And that mattered to me, right? When I was thinking about why should I spend this time, writing a note or doing this assessment or writing this plan down, is really to ensure continuity of care for the people you're working with. And that means something to me. It's still a pain in the neck, but hopefully the systems you have to enter data are getting more easy every day. At least you don't have to like print and photocopy everything the way we used to have to do. It was a lot of paper was involved, right? Um, so also documentation helps structure our work with people. So we do an assessment, that's part of the work. We do a plan, that's part of the work. And the plan is a is the concrete representation of the agreement for work together with the client, right? So this is how we can establish agreements in the service plan that's recommended. We recommend that the client signs it, that the worker signs it, that the supervisor signs it, so that it really is an agreement, like an MOU, really, of work together, a memorandum of understanding. It's also with documentation, we can track whether we've done what we said we do, which is important because we got to keep our promises, whether things have been done on time. We want to make sure we're keeping on top of getting folks onto the by name list, getting them into housing. In documentation, we can also save time and resources. So if somebody already did a really long and involved history, because they worked with this person for a long time, reading that is going to help us, first of all, serve the
Yeah.
person better. But it's also going to mean we're going to have to spend less time getting that information in order to build that relationship. We can focus on other things in the relationship because we have that information, right?
Yeah,
Um,
Suzanne, I
Go
think
ahead.
it's really important that people understand as they go to a new program, they don't have to start all over. And the warm handoff to transfer that engagement goes a long way towards that. But having that documentation so they're not asked all these questions, which are difficult for people over and over again, is huge.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then finally, just making sure, like I said, really at the beginning, that people know something and can help your clients in case you can't. So I think we have even a slide for this. This is a special poll. So we're going to have a quick poll just to give you one more poll, well, two more polls for the day. Is the documentation poll. So I'm going to launch this. It's long, but it's exactly what was on the previous slides. Just all polls are anonymous, by the way. I just want to say that so people don't feel shy about saying it. But Which of these reasons to keep documentation current seems most important to you? You can act technically pick all of them, but pick your top three. Like, what's really important to you in terms of doing documentation personally? I know it's a lot to read, so I'll give a little more time for this poll. Okay, we have about half of the people have answered, so I'll give it another few seconds because it is a lot to read. Okay. All right. We have 22. That's a good 21. Let's share the results. So out of 22 folks, so not people not falling through the cracks, getting agreements, getting people into housing, and so that other people can find your clients kind of bubbled up to the top. I think, the reason for even asking that is for you to find a personally meaningful reason to follow your documentation requirements, because that's what I needed. I needed it to be meaningful to me, that I could see that this was going to help the client if I did my documentation. It also helped to have some examples of how to write a psychosocial without going on and on and on and on, how to write a note and that gets at the points without wasting a lot of time. So I think that's the other thing, is making sure when you're doing your documentation that you feel like you have good examples and you know how to do it in an efficient way. So I'm going to stop sharing that poll. Um, and just talk. And you can read this slide again. Sorry, about what the standards are. These are in that guidebook, the Connecticut statewide outreach standards. You're supposed to use HMIS. There is an outreach interface, which I think is now rolled out to everyone. It was a pilot, but it's still not rolled out. Okay, Molly's shaking her
We're
head.
still testing. It's rolled out to
Okay.
some people for testing.
Okay, but that'll be coming shortly after the testing is done. So there'll be an interface for outreach to enter into HMIS. So make sure you follow these standards and putting the assessments in HMIS. Current living arrangements are really important. It's really important for tracking where people are and what's going on. So I'm going to highlight that. And then these are some other things you've got to do: living assessment, verify homelessness, and verify disability, or attempts to verify disability, because sometimes people will not agree to see a psychiatrist or see a treating professional, or we can't find one, or we're waiting for one. So that would also be documented in the file that we're waiting. Okay, James put document readiness is important for housing, finding work, staying at a motel, joining a gym. Absolutely. I think the thing about documentation for the people we're working with, so thank you, James, for bringing that up. That's really, really important, is helping
Mhm.
people get a birth certificate, a driver's license, or a non-driver ID, or whatever they need to be able to get a job, to be able to apply for an apartment. So that's also really important, James. That's absolutely, thank you for bringing that up. So those are the standards. Quick data system. So there are, someday we'll have a paperless office. Someday we'll have one master data system that we have to enter our data into, only one. But right now we're not there yet in the perfect world, but we're getting there. And there's some great interfaces put in place for outreach. So HMIS Caseworthy that's where you're expected to put the data in for your clients. The interface will be out there. There is also a data system for training on HMIS and using the HMIS. And so there's a learning management system. Again, these are live links. And if you're new, you need to register with this. And here's how to reach out on the right side, who to contact for help if you need to get in. So for all of the HMIS trainings, and soon other trainings will go through the learning management system. So you need to register as a user in there, which is tied to your email address. Then there's the DDAP system, DDAP, it's called affectionately. And that's a DEMA system. I don't even know what DDAP stands for. I can't believe it. Either outreach data has to go into the DDAP or it can go from HMIS to the DDAP system. Molly, do you know what that acronym? I can't believe I don't know that acronym because it's been around forever.
No, I just always call it DDAP, and not
DDAP,
not
okay.
always affectionately from my side.
But there is a crosswalk from HMIS, right? So
There
if you're
is.
using HMIS, then it's just one more step. You don't have to do double entry, but you can get the information uploaded to DDAP. And we'll find out what that acronym means. Then finally, and importantly, there is a PIT database that we use to do the point in time count for people who are not in regular HMIS, already have an open record and all that jazz to count people. So that's a Nutmeg hosted product. And there's training specifically for outreach workers on doing the PIT count. And that's actually perfect segue to the next slide, which is just to remind you guys that the point in time count is in 2 weeks from today. We training that day. I think we have a training that day. That may need to be
Yes,
rethought. I'm
the
not
next
sure.
pet training is the pet training assessment.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's probably a good plan since we need outreach people to do we can talk about it afterwards, Shannon. Anyway, outreach. So there is a update for the current living assessment for people through the outreach. Shannon's on the call and she can correct me on any details I say incorrectly about the PIT count for street outreach. But it's really important within 24 hours of the count to enter the current living situation, current living assessment for each person in outreach so we can properly count them for the point in time count. Isn't that correct,
You
Shannon?
have to complete it. The date of the assessment has to be the night of 1/28/25, but you have 7 days after that date to talk to your people, find out where they slept on the night of the 28th, and do that current living assessment in HMIS.
Thank you, Shannon, for having
Yeah.
those details right on your fingertips. So I really appreciate that. I don't know if there are any questions. I see a couple things popping in the chat if people have questions. This is important, this point in time count. I think everybody knows that the idea is really to know year round who's out there, but this is kind of an opportunity to, make sure we've got everybody if we can. Because it is cold, so it'll be folks that are really struggling. So we want to make sure we are counting them. So there's links here to the training, the slides, the recording of the slides. There's information for outreach team. And I hope everybody will participate in it. It is really much different from the way it used to be, where we were out in the middle of the night in the cold counting people on the streets. So now it's really done through your knowledge of them and the work that you're doing in an ongoing way. So hopefully that feels a little better for you because you're not wasting your time and you're able to be efficient and you're not out in the freezing cold trying to figure out if somebody's sleeping outside. Okay,
You see,
last slide.
Molly found
Yes,
out
oh, I'm
what
sorry.
DDAP stands for.
All
I
right,
did.
Molly.
Well, no, I didn't find out.
Courtney
Thank you
and
to
Stephanie.
Courtney and
Oh,
Stephanie, who were
Stephanie.
all over it.
Thank
Oh,
you.
I'll have to.
DEMIS data
Demas data
performance.
performance
Yes.
system. Demas data. What's the A from?
I think the beginning of data. I'm not going to say we always make the
Demas
best acronyms
data
here.
performance.
Or data.
Okay.
That could be and performance, maybe.
No, that's why the A is small.
No,
It's D
it's my
from
it is
data.
small. It's Demas data performance. Well, thank you so much for solving the mystery. Okay, great. So the last thing is just to, really pull this all together and wrap it up and let you guys go back and do the work that you got to do every day, is just to summarize the things we want to make sure are in your team that you're thinking about. And we're gonna have a quick poll on this. We're gonna wrap it up for today. Are things we've been talking about over and over: trauma informed, harm reduction, housing first, assertive engagement, building motivation for people, helping them feel more confident, housing needs and preferences, housing planning, navigation, helping people get money, income and resources, doing warm handoffs, and doing aftercare post housing. So, just a quick inventory question. I'm going to do a quick poll. Um, Final poll on what of these components are you using in your outreach program? Which things do you have in place? Again, remember, this is anonymous. We're not like trying to out anybody or find out. So there's two questions. Which things are you already doing of that list that was on the previous slide? And which things need some more attention? Do you need to pay more attention to as you develop your outreach program?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Just in the interest of time, I see we're really almost at the end. I'm gonna end the poll. I know still getting some responses coming in. Okay, I'll wait. All right. The end the poll and share the results. So housing first, it looks like is the thing. Housing first, housing planning, housing navigation. You guys are already doing a lot of this work. Uh, Looks like, building motivation. So that may be something we can spend some time on in our future sessions and in our communities of practice and assertive engagement. We can spend some time. And then which core components can use more attention? People talked about harm reduction, trauma-informed care, assertive engagement, motivation, housing planning, income assistance, so another subject, aftercare, post-housing and movement. So that's helpful to us, and thank you for taking a minute to answer the polls, polls from a perspective of kind of thinking about where you're at, and then also helping us think about what might be some sessions that will provide going forward when we do additional trainings. We'll definitely do something more on motivation because I think that's a really important issue for people is and they have to wait so long to get housing. So speed talking coming. All right, so we're gonna close up this session and by really first of all recognizing the important, critical, amazing work you guys are all doing. My hats are off to you, especially when we're in the colder months. It's really tough, but it's tough all year round. So thank you for your work. That's the first thing I'm going to say. Um, we've covered all these are learning points about meeting people where they're at and paying attention and making sure everybody's safe, using the resources that we've shared with you. Do your documentation, even though it feels like you want to spend more time with clients. They're both important. And if your documentation is onerous, talk to your team about it, talk to your supervisors. So that was the other thing I guess I wanted to say when Paul was talking about the shelters. I feel like that if your shelters are not working for you, that you should bring that to your can. Like there's a new process since the DOH rebid the system. There's new standards for shelters, and shelters are taking public money. And there's new responsibilities for CAN backbone agencies in terms of making sure people are following those things. So I want to encourage you to talk about that stuff in your team meeting, in your CAN meetings, so that we create a system that works for the people who need it. And we don't say, well, sorry, you don't fit into the shelter as it's designed, right? We want to make the shelter work. So that doesn't mean, giving up safety or anything else, but we know we can house people who have drug and alcohol problems safely in shelter, right? And we know we can adjust some of the changes to shelter. So speak up. So I don't think that's on the closing part of the slide, but I think that's the really important message I would say is use the quarterly outreach meetings, use your team meetings, use your CAN to continually talk about not only the people who are living unsheltered, but how the system works or doesn't work for those people and how we can make it work better. And we personally at Housing Innovations are really humbled to be working with you guys and supporting you. And we really are looking forward to supporting you throughout this process, through trainings and additional resources. And of course, we got some additional slides. Here's the other recordings. We have some upcoming webinars. We have quarterly outreach meetings. So you have all these dates here on your slides. Here's the training outreach training inventory link for you, and yet even more resources if you have any more time to look at any more resources. And then finally, our contact information. So I'm going to stop us there, and I'm going to stop the share. And it's only 2 minutes early, but it is earlier. We didn't go over and we got through all the slides. So thank you guys for coming. Shannon, I think you can pause the recording now. And